Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar on how companies, Indigenous people, and local communities are partnering to advance human rights and conserve nature. We're just about to get started, just giving people 1 or 2 minutes to get in. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on how companies, Indigenous peoples, and local communities are partnering to advance human rights and conserve nature. We have an exciting lineup of speakers to share some examples from around the world of this today. If you have any questions for the speakers, there may be some time at the end of the webinar for them to address these. So please type your questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And I also wanted to let everyone know that we are recording the webinar and we'll be sending out a link to the recording in the coming weeks. So without further delay, let's go ahead and get started. I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Solange Bandiaki-Badji. She is the coordinator of the Rights and Resources Initiative, a global coalition of over 150 organizations advancing the rights of Indigenous peoples, local communities, and Afro-descendant peoples. Dr. Bandiaki-Badji, welcome. Thank you for sharing with us today. I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen.
Thank you very much, Robin. Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. This is a very timely conversation and a very important topic for all of us. And just to add about RRI, as Robin said, we are a global coalition. And just wanted to mention, we do work, or our partners are Indigenous peoples, local communities, and Afro-descendant, and also mainly women and youth within these communities. And at the same time, as part of our approach, we do engage with government, we work with multilateral institutions, and we also engage with the private sector to adopt right-based institutional and market reform. So that's why, to me, this platform is very important, because we do really see private sector as a key ally. We do also see DFIs and civil society organizations as ally into the work that we do.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, I know that RRI has commissioned some pretty impressive research and been working for many, many years on advancing land tenure rights for Indigenous people, Afro-descendant peoples, and local communities, and has also had some pretty impressive research about the amount of biodiversity and carbon that exists globally on the lands of Indigenous people, local communities. Could you just help us frame the situation? You know, why is it important to work on land rights issues, and how does this relate to protecting biodiversity and addressing climate change?
Yes, this is a very fundamental question, and it all comes back to the main question that we all should be asking, which is, who owns the land, or who owns the carbon? I mean, whatever work that we do around resource governance, I think this is the main question that we should be asking. And as a global coalition, we do work on the ground in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, but at the same time, we do believe that strategic analysis is really key into the work that we do. Because again, as we all know, when you engage with government and the private sector, sometimes you need to have the evidence, right? Then they will listen to you. And for us, we don't do academic research, but we do really do strategic analysis to influence policy, but also for our right holders organization to use the research findings for advocacy. And every 5 years, we do have our flagship report it's either around who owned the world land or who owned the world forest or who owned the carbon. And this year we just published a research that always goes through a very thorough peer review process, because we want to make sure that our analyses are really validated and follow a rigorous methodology. And and this year we've published Who Owned the World Land. So what we really found, and one of the basic argument, is that indigenous people, local community, and Afro-descendant, and today I'll be referring to them as IPLCs, they traditionally use and manage half of the world land, but are recognized as legal owners of only 11%.
Wow.
So just 11% of these communities have legal ownership of their land. At the same time, they manage half of the world land. But also we have learned that their opportunity actually to increase this 11%. We looked into 73 countries, and 65 out of those 73 countries actually have legal framework that could allow for recognition of land right. But the main challenge that we're facing in many countries, it's implementation. But also, the other aspect that you talked about is contribution to conservation and climate goals. Because again, in the end, all of the things that we all do within different sectors is how can we contribute by 2030 to biodiversity conservation and also to mitigating climate change. So these communities actually that we are talking about, they are more than 1 billion, and they live in important biodiversity conservation areas most of the time. And also, research have revealed that 300 million people of these communities, they live in areas that are targeted for tropical forest restoration. But again, what research have revealed is that forests that are legally owned or designated for use by this group, they have lower rates of deforestation and forest degradation. That's one thing. But also they have lower carbon emissions and higher carbon storage. And at the same time, they are willing to make greater investment in forest maintenance and activities. And maybe one last thing to say about your question is that all of this securing land right is very important in all that we do. And in order to achieve the global climate and conservation goal, we need to make sure that land rights are recognized. Also for private companies, secure land rights means secure investment, because we have seen in countries or communities where land rights are not recognized, there are many conflicts between companies and the communities. And most of the time, it has a negative impact on the investment. But if companies, if communities have legal ownership, they tend to interact as equal with companies, and that makes it very easy actually to negotiate on what needs to be done. And also their free, prior, and informed consent, the FPIC, is always upfront, so they can negotiate and say either yes or no. But once they say yes, you know that your investment will be secure.
Wonderful. I wonder if you could also talk a little bit about what can companies do to help advance land rights and to support the goals of protecting biodiversity and addressing climate change that they share with many indigenous peoples, local communities, Afro-descendant communities?
This is a very good question, but what I wanted to do is to show a slide, because I wanted to really show the funding ecosystem that exists right now, where companies can really engage with those IP and LC funding ecosystem. And here I'll be sharing some of the tools that we have within RRI, but also the trend that we are seeing within the sector right now. At RRI, we have three mechanisms. One is the strategic response mechanism, and it has been in play or inactive. It has been active for more than 10 years. And actually, this is one of the really a mechanism where we have more achievement, and we call it the strategic response mechanism. And the SRM, that's the acronym. It's a financial mechanism designated by RRI to enable timely and flexible response to unforeseen opportunities and threat. Because as we know, threat to indigenous communities, most of the time they require, rapid action. But also, I mean, the windows can open, and if you don't, react quickly, then they close and there's not much to do. So, and for the type of grant that we give is around 10,000 and the maximum is 100K. And that strategic response mechanism can be implemented in everywhere, like in low and low middle income countries. That's the LLMIC. But also, as some of you might know, we created the tenure facility around 2013. And the reason why we created the tenure facility is that we realized that there were many progressive laws that are emerging and policies around land right. But like I said at the beginning, implementation has been an issue. Then the tenure facility was created to really focus on right implementation. And the type of funding they give is around 1 million to 2 million, and they also interact with civil society organization and government. But also the tenure facility now is independent, up and running, and doing great work on the ground. And after that, the coalition members, the right holders, was like, okay, great that the tenure facility is up and running, great that RRI has the strategic response mechanism. But most of the time, many organizations don't have direct access to funding. The funding that we give generally stays within the umbrella organization, like, the big secretariat at the local level or civil society organization. Then that's how we created, like 2 years ago, what we call the Community Land Rights and Conservation Finance Initiative, and known as Clarify. So Clarify support, advocacy, conservation, governance, capacity or organizational building of indigenous people, local communities, their livelihoods, but also we serve as a financial intermediary, because most of the time, many local organizations, because they're not based in the US, they can have access to funding due to some of the IRS requirement, but we can serve as a fiscal sponsor or a financial intermediary so they can receive the fund. And this funding mechanism is up and running also. I mean, and I can tell you a little bit more about it, but we have right now around 38 projects being implemented in the Global South, Africa, Asia, and Latin America. So this is really what we as RRI have put in place. But one of the trends that we're seeing right now is many indigenous and local community organizations are putting in place their own funding mechanism. And here, as you could see on the slide, I'm just mentioning few, but there's a long list that we can share later on. For example, the Pudali Fund, it's in Brazil and has been put in place by the indigenous community in Brazil. And Pawanka Fund, which is a global fund, also really trying to coordinate with indigenous movement from different ecosystems. And recently, the Asia Indigenous Movement, actually, they created another regional funding mechanism, which is called IPAS. And in Mesoamerica, the Mesoamerican Territorial Fund, AMPB, has created that fund also to support local organizations in Mesoamerica. And last, the Nusantara Fund in Indonesia has been put in place by AMAN, which is one of the largest indigenous movement in Indonesia, and other agrarian and peasant organization to support indigenous movement in Asia. And all of these funding mechanisms, actually, the reason why I'm really sharing this, because these funding mechanisms are opportunities and they have been tested, they're working, and private companies, actually, if they want to really support indigenous and local communities, they can either reach out to Clarify or to these indigenous funding mechanism. And maybe a last slide that I would like to share is on Clarify, which is what I mentioned is a new funding mechanism. And we want to contribute to fundraising of at least 10 billion between now and 2030. And this is the goal of the sector, not only for Clarify, but we want to contribute to this. And what we have seen is that the private philanthropies, the public bilaterals, they are investing in supporting community land rights. But we're not really seeing the type of pledge from the philanthropists coming from the private sector. Maybe it would be great for the companies to see, okay, what kind of pledge can they put forward to support the type of work that Clarify and all these indigenous and local community funds are putting in place. And last, another target that we have is to increase the area for legal ownership of up to 400 million hectares. So all of this really just to say that, you know, there's a lot to do. And I'm sure the question that the participant of this webinar might have is, okay, where private companies fit in. And Robin, if you just allow me, I would like to just maybe raise like, you know, three main, like, you know, areas where the private sector can really chime in. I think I'm done with the slide. Okay, and just maybe one is that progressive companies and investors, due to the emerging EU laws and sustainability commitment, are looking to strengthen human rights, local livelihood, and conservation across their supply chain. But what is really missing is that they lack the partnerships and mechanism required to directly support these communities. And this is a gap. And that gap, funding mechanism like Clarify and the IPLC, like, you know, regranting mechanism, they could help address those issues. And second is that there is more and more funding being channeled or committed to directly support communities to secure their right or manage or conserve ecosystem. And these funding mechanisms are increasingly supporting communities in areas that intersect or overlap with company sourcing landscapes. So that, I think the main question is, okay, how do you really, like, you know, for example, use the forest positive commitment and landscape approach and also not to mention the EU mandates on human rights and environmental due diligence and deforestation free product. And how do we really, like, you know, see company and investors like seeking pathway to support local livelihood connected to their supply chain? I think that's another area that could really work with the private sector. And maybe last is that also companies and investors, actually, they don't have the relationship and partnership in place to bridge the distance between them and communities, which is needed to really directly support their self-determined livelihood. And again, these funding mechanisms that I really present can really, like, you know, provide a channel for companies to invest directly in communities that are either near or within their sourcing landscape to support their livelihood, achieve sustainability commitment, and comply with the emerging EU legislation. And I'll leave it there. There's a lot more that we can say, but these are the key points that I really wanted to put forward.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And I think you've really outlined all of the so many different funds, I won't say all, but so many different funds and opportunities to directly fund communities around the world who are working towards conservation and land rights. So that's wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next, we will be hearing from Dr. Inza Kone. I'm just bring up the slide. There we go. Dr. Kone is the Director General of the CSRS, the Center of Swiss Scientific Research in Côte d'Ivoire, and he is also lead for the Tano Ehi Forest Conservation Fund project. And just to share a little bit more about the Forest Conservation Fund, this is a Swiss nonprofit that connects funding from companies, individuals, trusts, foundations, to high-impact, grassroots, community-managed conservation projects in threatened rainforest landscapes. And they have a special focus on landscapes that are also key sourcing regions for many different commodities, such as palm oil, timber, cocoa, coconut, rubber, and pulp and paper. So if you would like to learn more about the Forest Conservation Fund, you can visit their website. But today we get to hear about one of the projects, the Tano Ehi project. So over to you, Dr. Kone, to share more about the project.
Thank you, Robin. So
And
Okay.
I'll just share. Yes, I'm bringing it up right now.
Okay.
Ah, sorry. There we go. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So the project is about community empowerment for the conservation of endangered primates and their habitat in southeastern Cote d'Ivoire. I'll present the project very briefly and give a few examples as to how companies can support such a project. Next slide. So before I start, a few words about CSRS, my institution. So CSRS stands for Swiss Center for Scientific Research in Cote d'Ivoire, literally translated. CSRS is a regional institution of excellence in the service of science, individual and institutional capacity building, and informing multi-scale decision-making processes for development. CSRS has been established in Cote d'Ivoire since 1951, which means that we have more than 70 years of research in partnership for development in West Africa. We have 4 different research intervention axes. The first one is research. The second one, individual and institutional capacity building, services and knowledge management, and finally, administration of research. CSRS is a transdisciplinary research institution. Research is organized around 5 different research portfolios. The first one is biodiversity management and ecosystem services, food security and nutrition in second. The third one is health systems and environmental management. The fourth, adaptation to climate change. And the fifth one is political, environment, and social systems. To come back to the project, the Tanwe AE community-based conservation project was initiated in 2006 and currently involves 11 different villages. The project aims to conserve 4 of the most endangered primates of West Africa, namely the rollaway greenhorn that you see in this picture. Next slide. The second one is the white-tagged black and white colobus. Next. The third one is the white-napped mangabe, and the fourth one is Miss Waldron's red colobus. These monkeys and their historical distribution range have not been the focus of any conservation project. This project is an example of how communities can play major roles in conservation activities combined with local development. The project has 6 different components: multi and transdisciplinary research, so involving zoology, botany, social science, economics, and so on. Awareness raising using various approaches, community organization and capacity building. I think Solen mentioned the importance of this. Surveillance, that is also important. Support to forest designation process, because it was not a protected forest when we started. And finally, support to local development, especially by promoting alternative livelihoods. The alternative livelihoods activities that we support are many. The main ones are agroforestry. Since I would say 2015, we introduced in farmlands about 30,000 trees, covering more than 700 hectares in farmlands, and also 5 kilometers at the forest edge. Let's go back. The second alternative livelihood activity that we support is cassava farming and processing. Through this, we've been able to diversify the income sources and also to increase the incomes of groups of women for foods. The activities of the projects have impacted conservation and also communities. One of the major outcomes of the project is the designation of this forest as a community reserve, which was done in December 2021. We have achieved significant reduction of threats as revealed by sterling quarterly reports since January 2022 by Forest Conservation Fund. No new confirmed deforestation alert was, I would say, observed. And focal species are thriving as reported by bird monitoring reports, since we observe no reduction in population size and distribution, and monkeys are increasingly found at the periphery of the forest, and we even discovered a new species of frog in the Tanwe A forest. On communities, our impact short terms is, I would say, community engagement, because we value traditional knowledge systems and we also diversify and increase the incomes. This leads to changes, positive changes of attitudes towards the forest and wildlife, and also the emergence of local champions, local leaders. In the long run, what we do in terms of agroforestry will increase the resilience of farmlands and also bring additional sources of incomes through the exploitation of non-timber forest products and also the selling of carbon credits. What is the role of companies? Companies may play several roles, as European zoos do with us since the beginning through WAPCA, West African Primates Conservation Action, and AFDPZ, Association Française des Parcs Zoologiques, so the French Association of Zoological Parks, who support most of our project components. We also receive support from a private company based in the Netherlands called AquaPlus. They've been supporting awareness raising campaign and also agroforestry activities. In third position, we receive funds from the Bond Foundation, which sells credit carbons and support agroforestry and also biomonitoring and forest surveillance. We have also stimulated the development of a business relationship with a local company called Top Gari, which buys all the products made by our women who process cassava. And in the future, we'll certainly receive further funding through Forest Conservation Fund, including donations from individuals. So to sum up, companies may intervene in various ways, either by supporting one or several components of the project or by developing a business relationships with, I would say, community members. Thank you very much for your kind attention, and sorry for these changes of slides.
No, you can blame me for that. Thank you very much, Dr. Kone. It's extremely helpful to have this real life on the ground example of what it means to work with communities, local communities on forest conservation through the Forest Conservation Fund. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next, we would like to invite Dr. Deanna Izoni. She is the Executive Director of Seke Dene Nation. And let me just bring up So Deanna is the Executive Director of Seke Dene Nation and a Seke Dene citizen. She grew up on the land with her family and has deep connections to Seke Dene values, culture, and spirituality. She's also served as the Director of Land and Resources and Treaty Operations, Director of Language and Culture for the nation, and is currently the Executive Director. So Deanna, could I invite you to turn on your camera, and we would love to hear from you. Welcome.
Hello, everyone.
And would you like me to post some questions, or do you prefer to show your slides?
We can do questions and then go with the slides as we go along. Sure, that works fine.
Okay. So why don't we start by, could you tell us a little bit about Seike Dene Nation? Where is it? A bit about the culture, the territory, the people?
If you want to play the first slide, I can talk about it, and it has a little map on there, so it could show a little bit of some of the locations and cabin locations that we have on the territory, which is in northern British Columbia. It is along the.
Sorry to interrupt, but you never sent me the slides, so you would need to share it.
Oh, okay, yeah, I did send it. Sorry.
No worries.
There we go. Can you see that?
Yes, thank you.
Perfect. So if you can see that Seike is a small community located in northern British Columbia. The territory stretches from the north of the Nation River, following along many different trenches along the Finley. It goes all the way up and it crosses the Arctic Pacific divide, all the way up to the end of Two Daddy Lake to the east of the territory, which reaches the Redfern Provincial Park and travels south to the Peace Arm, also known as, it was the Peace River, but it's now known as the Williston Reservoir due to the flooding that happened in the 60s with our territory.
Great. And could you talk a little bit about what kind of industrial or company activities take place on the territory, and how does that impact Seike Dene?
There is a lot of heavy forest industry within our territory right now, and that's kind of like the whole of the territory except for the northwest end. And the area that we don't have forestry, we have mining. A lot of mining companies are on the northwest side of their territory, and it flows all the way to down to the south side. So we have quite a bit of mining exploration activities going on. And so what usually happens is we just get a thing called a notice of work. And then the mining proponents let us know that they have, mineral claims within the territory, which is probably not the best way to, engage with us when it comes to mining.
We understand that Seike has established some protected areas, the Injinika Indigenous Protected and Conserved Area and the Chuyaza Conservancy. Can you briefly tell us about those, and how is it different for it to be an Indigenous-led protected area versus what people think of as a national park, like Banff National Park or something like that? What's the key difference there?
The difference is 100% that it's with rights and title, and knowing that our claim and our treaty claim for self-government is very imperative, that there's a huge difference. If it's a provincial park, it's still labeled as Crown land. And that is the whole treaty process we're going through right now. So we want to, kind of step away from that model and go more towards like our rights and title as First Nations, as stewards of the lands for thousands of generations, with our ancestors that have first set foot here. And we've been technically keepers of the land for numerous years. Our elders have extensive knowledge, and they know where like all the rivers, creeks, plants, wildlife. So for the Injinika and the Chuyaza, it holds quite large significance for us. It's the whole of the Injinika watershed comes all the way down from McConnell Creek, which is the north end of our territory, all the way down. It is called Injiniga in our language, meaning the small red berries that grow along the river, and that's Injini berries. So there's a ton of stories about the Chuyaza, and there's a ton of stories about Injinika that I've heard that were passed down from my grandparents all the way, for generations. And I've also grew up in the Injinika and Chuyaza for most of my childhood. Our people have trails along the river. There's places that we've camped. And so it's just really important that we protect these areas that, the last places that we have that have had very limited industry and very limited forest activity in the area. And it's those small places that we can protect. It's a one small step to protect more areas within our territory by practicing our rights and our title to the land.
Thank you. And I've had the pleasure of visiting these places, and they're just extraordinary and very impressive, deep knowledge of how to steward the resources there among the Seike Dene people. I wonder, So we understand that you have a partnership with Earthworm Foundation, and that's supported by downstream private sector companies like 3M, Nestle, and Mars. Could you talk a little bit about what's being done together through that partnership?
Yes, so the partnership was established a couple years ago, and it was created through Lands Resources and Treaty Operations at the time. And so I think our earthworm collaboration is imperative with some of the work that we're doing when it comes to, you know, land stewardship and sustainable harvest and sustainable sustainable environmental safe, I'm not sure how to word it, but yeah, I think it's imperative when earthworm, our collaboration is just, you know, it's about responsibility, and it's about our responsibility to the land. It's about our responsibility on how we are stewards of the land. And it's very important that we have a loud voice, and that our voice is heard, and that as we move forward, that we're recognizing not only the land and the agreements that we have with people coming in, but we're making sure that it's sustainable for our future generations, that we're not over harvesting in areas, and we're not, you know, making impacts that are too great that we cannot recover from that, because that is so important. It's all about what's in it, what lies in it. And I think that Earthworm has the same kind of vision that we have with that, and definitely speaks a loud voice in the same aspects of a lot of things when it comes to sustainable harvest in territories. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's wonderful that it's been based on shared values, and that the companies involved are also sending that message to the forestry companies that they're buying from, so that it's both the forestry companies operating on the territory are able to hear both from you and the nation, as well as from their buyers, about the importance of this. So it's been a wonderful partnership. I'm curious, what guidance would you give to companies who may have supply chains that come from this part of Canada, or may have other supply chains internationally that are coming from Indigenous peoples' lands? What advice or guidance would you give them about how to support Indigenous people impacted by their supply chains, or how to partner with them?
Yeah, that's a huge question. I think that, like, this, we don't have all day, so I will just kind of go over some key points. So I did put on my slide here, you know, the biggest thing is just to listen to who you're speaking with and how we are connected to the land. Like, each of us are very much, and I think it's the same with other, like, I can't speak for other countries and stuff, but I know that, you know, a lot of people, when they think Indigenous people, it's like one size kind of fits all. It's like we are very diverse. And it's like we have a various different types of culture and traditions, even though we are First Nations. So we have the Carrier, you know, and they have different beliefs and custom than we do. And we are Tseke Dene, we're Stikani people. And so our traditions and customs and culture are different. And I think understanding that diversity in the First Nations within Canada is huge, to understand that those aspects and get to know who you're talking to. And each one of us have a different connection to the land. So you want to find out kind of what that is. Another thing is just to take time to get to know the people on the territory and the territory you're working on. So it's not, as you get to know the people, you get to know the territory, and you get to know the significance of what that territory means to the nation, what that territory means to us. And so I think it's also to recognize how the work impacts our lives and our families and our homes. Understanding that if there's too much industry within our territory, then we have a reduction. We lose the ability to practice our culture and teach our children, because there's less places that we can go. Our territory becomes smaller with more industry that is on the territory. And to understand our rights to the land, and it is our land, and we have been here for generations. And when doing consultation, don't try to rush it to just say, oh, I'm going to check the box and try to get this done so I can move to the next level of my project, because your project may not continue, you know, depending on what area it is, because we have some significantly spiritual areas and some areas that, you know, just can't have any industry or mining proponents within that area. And I think also like if companies aren't aware of UNDRIP or FPIC, which is free, prior, informed consent, and UNDRIP is the United Declaration of Indigenous Rights, to get to know that, to read those documents and really try to understand what that means when you're coming on to our territories.
Thank you for that excellent advice. I think there's a lot there that's very important to keep in mind for any company as they begin to build relationship. Any final thoughts or points that you would like to make before we finish up?
No thoughts. I just thank you for having me on here. And I just want to say that it's good that we're all having these open dialogues and discussions about things like this, because it is important. And I think moving forward, we will learn to do things differently and collaboratively together. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So next, we're going to have Aerith and Gachu. And let me bring up his. Welcome, Aerith. Aerith is the country head for Cameroon for Earthworm Foundation, and he's also leading CSE Africa. He has been a trainer at the Center of Social Excellence in Africa since its very beginning, and has also been leading it once he took over as country head for Cameroon. He has a good level of cross-cultural awareness and ability to resolve complex issues across multiple countries of West Africa. So welcome, Aerith. It's wonderful to have you.
Thanks, Robbie.
And I'll turn it over to you to share today about the work that the Center of Social Excellence is doing in Guinea.
Thank you, Robin. Hi, everyone. Before I started, I want to introduce what was the CSE. The CSE is the Center of Social Excellence launched by Harbouring Foundation, at the time the Forest Trust, in 2008. This was created to help especially logging company in Central Africa to address social tension between private sector logging company and local community, because local community, they were claiming right on their land and resources. The previous speaker talked about the free, prior, informed consent. So at the time, the private sector, the logging company were not really equipped to deal with surrounding communities in the forest sector. So at the time, we created the CSE to train young graduates to help company in mediating tension, conflict between local communities and logging companies. So this is how we launched the CSE in 2008. So gradually we expand the experience in the agro-industrial sector in West Africa, with the growing of plantation industry in West Africa, in Liberia, in Sierra Leone, in Ghana, in Nigeria. We expand this experience, and most recently in 2020, we responded with demand to deploy the experience in the mining sector in Guinea. So basically, what I'm going to present here is what we're doing in Guinea since 2020. Next. So Guinea, for those who are not really familiar with Africa, is a West African country. You can see on the slide. We are in Guinea, in one sector, which is the mining sector. But in Guinea, we dealing with the bauxite sector, right? The bauxite sector is, you can see on the down left of the slide, is the Bokeh region, where bauxite activity exploitation is ongoing. since several years. And just for your information, Guinea, over the last decade, become the second and almost the first bauxite producer in the world. So you can imagine the level of tension that could exist between local communities and company. So we started this experience in Guinea by adapting our curriculum in Guinea in 2020, and then we launched. Next slide. We launched the first batch. So basically, what we did in Guinea was to conduct the selection of the first batch, because we convinced that we can address social issue just by training people from company or local communities, right? What we did, we invited people from private sector, from civil society organization, from local community, but also for local council, because most of the time, people don't think about local council. They are the main actor in terms of governance of their territory and all this. So we invite them for this training, and out of almost 150 applicants, we selected 20 participants during the first batch. Next. So basically what we did, the objective of this training is to improve the social capacity of staff from the private sector, from civil society, from the government organization, from community within the landscape. Why the government? Because they are the decision maker, right? They are the one who decide, who allocate concession, right of exploiting resources and all this. And we are dealing with a very transparent world with growing requirement from the market. And the government authority from the capital city to the local city, they must be aware on how to address all the conflict between community and companies, how to facilitate in the participatory way some of the processes, how to obtain community consent. This training also aims to build strong collaborative personal relationship between key actors. Just to let you know, when we started the first batch, after 1 month, one of the participants from the civil society, he stood up and he said, I wasn't aware that we could sit down and discuss all together the issue we are facing in Guinea, between private sector, between local NGO, between communities, between council actors. So what we're doing is build this kind of collaborative platform between actors to explore how to solve this issue, and also to build a kind of common understanding of social and environmental challenges. Most of the time, one of the legal requirements we have is to get all the private sector company to carry out environmental and social impact assessment. What we have is, at the end of this process, is a document. But we realize that most of the community we consult do not understand in reality what means environmental and social impact assessment. So some of the key element of the CSE is, for instance, the free, prior, informed consent. How do we translate all this information from the document to the ground? Because most of the time, community, they are consulted, but in reality, they are not very much aware on the scale of the impact they will leave in reality on the ground. So we have a training based on 3 pillars in Guinea. We have a training of social practitioner, we have training of community leader, and because we would like to fertilize the environment, we're driving stakeholder interaction at the local level, but also at very high top level in Guinea. Next. So up to today, we have trained 2 batch. We launched the 3rd batch last August in Guinea. So a total of 60 social practitioners trained today in Guinea and 20 community leaders in Guinea. So last November, we trained the 1st batch of community leaders because we realized that there is a need to adapt the understanding at the very community level where people interact on a daily basis. How do we translate all these requirements from the market, from the legal perspective into the reality on the ground? People who live, community leaders are really people who live in the village on the day-to-day, and they can interact with their family, with their friends, with their partner, to really share some of this knowledge and interact with all these stakeholders. So this is really crucial to get that level of understanding among the stakeholders. Next. Next. So basically, I would like to show how the number of social practitioners per sector and per gender. You can see that we have trained people from government administration, also from municipality, because as I mentioned, we need to influence how governance processes are driven at the local level. Also, people from affected communities. This experience was really great because we realized that inviting people from affected communities, train them as social practitioners, enable them to understand really what are the challenges, but also to be kind of force of proposition, suggestion in terms of how do we improve the collaboration between local communities and private companies. How do we improve the collaboration between local communities and the local council? How do we improve collaboration between local communities and local or international CSO? On this specific slide, you can see how the distribution of social practitioner and community trained per council. And today, what we're trying to do is to set up platform per council where we can have people trained from private sector, from civil society, from affected community, but also from local council to sit down and figure out how altogether we could look for a solution, not just to address pending grievances, but also to foresee how they could strengthen the local development, how they could manage their resources. What is really powerful during the training of the second batch, there were a group from the committee who really work on how to rehabilitate land, because after the mining operation, sometimes land are not very good for agricultural production. So there is a need to restore the land. So this group coming from local community, they work over 6-month period on how to produce local fertilizer, and was really great that we realized that this local fertilizer, local manure, are made up from waste produced by local community, right? There are not chemical involved or all this. Carry out analysis, and from this local manure, they were able to produce vegetable And I think in terms of local content, there is something to explore between, there is a market opportunity to explore between local communities and private company, because private company through their workers they represent a market. But most of the time, you also realize that soil rehabilitation are sometimes outsourced to consultants or all this who are not really familiar with the type of the soil. They are not really familiar with the type of the local production they are doing. By having these people coming from community and developing their local manure and all this, they're able to show that, yeah, they can develop skills and produce vegetables that can be sold work in private company. So those are some of the great collaboration we could have. And this, instead of remaining in the reactive mode, we could be in the proactive mode in terms of local development, in terms of collaboration, but in terms of peace around investment. Yeah, next. So all this was possible because of the support of ARCOA Foundation. They have supported this initiative 100% since the beginning. And this is the occasion for us to thank ARCOA Foundation. Thank you.
Thank you, Aerith. And we have, it looks like 3 minutes. So there's not a lot of time for questions left, but I would like to thank all of our speakers today. I hope everyone has benefited from the great diversity of presentations that we've been able to have, looking at funds like Clarify that have been set up around the world that companies can use as funding mechanisms if they want to directly fund land rights. Also funds like the Forest Conservation Fund, where they can fund conservation projects in regions that they're sourcing from. Great insights from Seke Dene Nations, Deanna Izoni, about examples of how companies are impacting Indigenous people and what can be done to also have positive impacts and respect and conserve important areas. And also thank you to Aerith and Gacho for walking us through what multi-stakeholder collaboration in a specific sourcing landscape supporting local communities could look like. So a huge thank you to all of our speakers today. If people would like to learn more, they're welcome to visit our website or email communications@earthworm.org. And then we will also be, I saw that there were some questions there that we don't have time to get to today, but I will be sharing those with our presenters and they may be able to respond in a follow-up email. But you can expect a follow-up email from us with more links to each of the projects, and feel free to contact us with additional questions. So thank you everyone for joining us.